G'day, Stu from UAVfutures here, and today, well, I'm going to show you something very special. How to build something, what? You want to have speed, maneuverability, or just fun? Then you're going to be building one of these. Whoops. Rightio, all jokes aside, we're going to be building one of these. This is the Rotor CF1.10 Atom Quad, and I've got to say, this is probably the world's most fun FPV quadcopter. It is an absolute beast, a crazy machine. It's super fast, super agile, and just super easy to transport. You can hit tiny gaps with it. So this is definitely my #1 favorite quad to fly at the moment. I've got a whole bunch, and this is definitely the one that's going to be getting the most airtime. So I'm going to be going through what you need, the components I'll be using, and also how to put it together because it's a pretty complex build. Rightio, now on this note, I definitely don't recommend, and this is something I usually say, this build for first time builders because this thing is tight and light. Ooh, I made that up, that sounds pretty good. Tight and light, and you definitely don't have too much room to spare in here. It is 99 grams of 3S insane power. It can handle 4S, an absolute little beast of a machine, but definitely not recommended for first time builders because it's kind of tricky to get everything crammed in here and making it fit and sit nicely. Rightio, so I'm going to go through all the parts that I used and why I picked those ones, and also the process of putting it together, and then hopefully I'll show you some flight footage. Alright, let's get started. Alrighty, so this is everything you're going to need to make this little insane powerhouse, and we'll quickly go over what's here, and then when we get to each part I'll talk about it in more detail. So we've got the bottom plate, top plate, we've got some atom armor just there, a little voltage regulator, a receiver, we've got our VTX just here, our 4 motors, 4 props and 4 ESCs, but I recommend getting some spares of these as well, our FPV antenna, we've got our PDB and our flight controller, we've got some buzzers and little, what do you call these things? We've got some buzzers and header pins and stuff like that, as well as our sort of screws and standoffs. And then we've also got some angled camera mounts, our FPV camera, and also an XT30 connector. I'll have all this stuff sort of linked in the video description as well, so if you just want to click that, if you're wondering where I got each part from, you'll find a link that'll go straight to it. Rightio, let's get started. Alright, now the first thing we're going to be doing is working on our PDB, and we're using a Genix PDB, and this is specifically designed for the Atom, and I'll have a link to all these products in the description. This is specifically designed for the Atom, so it can be in a real compact size. It can fit just underneath the nays like this, and you'll have a fantastic clean looking build. And something I really love about these PDBs, they come with a little sort of set of blocks just here that allow the pins from the nays to directly slide on top just here like that. So it's going to be a super clean build, which is very important because space is definitely at a premium. Alright, and my first step, what I want to do is I want to install this sort of block here, and this is where your ESCs and things like that will connect to your nays and your flight controller. But these pins stick out too far for my liking. They're sticking out by maybe 1 or 2 mils, so I'm just going to mark about how far I need to actually take them off, and that way I can cut them down to size because we really need to minimize the height of this stack. So I've just got my magic marker here, and I'm just going to mark them down. Rightio. Alright, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and just cut off the tips of each one of these little pins that sticks out so I won't see where the magic marker is anymore. So probably taking it down by about 1 or 2 mil. And I'm just going to use some of these to do that, my wire cutters. Alrighty. And now when we install this block, we can see it doesn't stick through quite so much. So we're going to save ourselves just a couple of mil, but you're going to be surprised at how much of a difference that makes when it's coming through just here. And we're just going to solder these up right now. Alright, so now that this block is done, we also have this little tiny block just here, and this is a 2x2 block, and this is going to be where our buzzer sort of port and things in our VBAT go. So I'm just going to put this inside just here, and I'm also going to mark just how much of it I need to cut off and go through the same process. Alright, now when it comes to soldering these, they're just going to fit straight in to sort of these header parts just here, this header block, and then there's a little block on the other side just over, geez, see if I can get it in, just over here. So you're going to have some at the front of the PDB, and then this little block at the back here as well. We'll need to put that one in. Just going to flip this over and solder away. Alright, and then, so nice clean tip on the solder. Alright, and now we'll do this little block over here on this side, this 2x2. Alright, so there's that part done of the PDB. Now I thought about using a buzzer as well in here because there is a little space for the buzzer, but it actually sticks up 1 or 2 mil higher than this, and I'm not sure if we're going to actually have that space because it's a tiny sort of little frame. So this is all going to be modular, so I'm going to wait and see if I'll have enough room to put this in or not. I can always go back in and put this in if I have the space. Alright, now the next thing we need to do, we need to attach our little 5-volt sort of polulu regulator, and that's going to give us some power so we can power our nays and our receiver and things like that. But this also fits perfectly on. This is another reason why I love this PDB, because it can fit in straight on top of this just here. It can slide right in, but we need to adjust the height of these pins for the same reason there. We're really trying to minimize the amount of height that this stack is going to take. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a bit of pliers, and I'm actually going to slide this little bit of plastic block up just a little bit so these pins just save 1 or 2 mil off each one. Alrighty. And then that's going to let me solder these in just here like that. So let's get started on that. Now I'm going to use a bit of glue tack or blue tack. I don't know what you call it in your country. And this can be used instead of some helping hands, and it makes my life a lot easier for holding some things. And look at this, I might even rest this on the Sharpie. Nothing but the best here. So you got to make do with what you have. Nice clean tip on the soldering iron. Now that I've soldered these top pins just here, what I'm going to want to do is spin this over, and underneath here I'm just going to slide up this little plastic case all the way off, and this, oh, that came off quite easily for me actually. I'm going to slide this off. Alright, and now that plastic's off, that's going to enable these pins to fit nice and snug when it slides onto the PDB just here, and we'll put it on just like that, and that's how we'll be able to solder it. So I'm just going to mark that distance just here where the pins come through, so I know how far I need to cut them. Alright, take it out and give it a little trim. And just before I solder this onto the board of my PDB, I'm just going to put a little bit of electrical tape just across the bottom here, just in case there's some shorts or anything like that when it's contacting the rest of the PDB. Here's my little bit of tape. Just going to put it on here just like this and trim that up nice and neat. Alrighty, and this is going to slide straight into our PDB and sit nicely on the top. Now you do want to make sure you get this around the right way, so the voltage out is definitely lining up with the 5 volts on the PDB. And now I'm just going to solder this in place using the same method as before. So a nice clean tip on our solder just here, and we want to get in and out. Alright, so now our 5 volt voltage regulator is soldered into our PDB, and we can move along. Alright, now the next thing we want to do, and it's a little bit technical, we're actually going to pull each of these individual pins out just here, and we're going to slide them in one by one through the nays into their corresponding block hole below. That sounds funny, block hole. But what that's going to let us do is have a really nice, clean, low profile stack when we're finished. So I'm going to go ahead and pull each of these. You're going to need 16, so you're going to need 12 for the 12 for the ESC side of things and the power, and another 4 over here that's for your VBAT and your buzzer if we want to connect that later. So I'm going to pull these out just here. They come out really easy. God, this last one's hard. Alright, so I've got my 16 little header pins, and now I'm going to slide them down in here through this ESC connections and also through the other connections on this side into the block below, and then I'll be able to measure just how long they need to be to hold my nays in place. Alright, so all my pins are in just here, and you can see it makes a really nice sort of clean build. What we need to do is mark them, and then that'll let us know how far we need to cut them. So I'm going to mark them again with my magic marker. Alright, and then I'm going to take this off, and I'm just going to cut my pins at that length, because that'll be the perfect length to fit onto our nays. Alrighty, so I've trimmed all the pins down just here, and you can see it's fitting very nice and snug. And if you happen to trim a pin down too far, just take that one out if it's not popping all the way through, and just cut a new one down. So you should have plenty of these lying around anyway. I think some spare ones come with the kit. But these all fit perfectly on here on top of the nays and also on top of the buzzer part just here. So I'm going to go ahead and solder them up. So there's one set done, and now I'm just going to go over here and do the other set, so the buzzer and the voltage. Alright, so there it is. There is our really nice clean little stack like that. We're going to have our PDB and our connections directly to our NAs and our ESCs, so that's fantastic. And if there's ever a problem, we can always just gently shift it apart like that, and we can work on it. Awesome, let's keep going. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to prep this board here ready for mounting my battery connector and my ESCs and things like that. So I'm going to pre-tin the ESC parts and also the battery lead part. So we'll just go through just here and we'll just go around. It's a really easy process. Alrighty, so our PDB is pretty much prepped and we're ready to go. Alright, so we've prepped our PDB and now we're going to sort of space it up and put it on the Atom and just have a look at how much space we need because we get to do some fun parts. So, well, it's all fun, but we're going to find out how we can mount our motors and our ESCs on here. So I'm going to be using the Rotor 1105 Gatling motors, and these things are beasts. So, I mean, these things can run 3S and 4S, so it's going to be an absolute rocket. And we're going to be using the famous Little B Opto 20 amp ESCs. They're probably my tried and tested ESC and the best one I've used anyway. Really, really reliable and recommended. Anyway, so we're going to find out just how we're going to put these in here, and I pretty much want to mount the ESC on the arm with the motor directly soldered to it. So we're going to be cutting off some bullet connectors, taking off all these wires over here and making it a lot lighter. So let's get started on the motor ESC process. Alright, now the first thing I'm going to want to do on my ESCs is just cut off this heat shrink just here because we're going to need to desolder all these wires. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that off my 4 ESCs. So just run your knife down the side and you should be able to peel it open like an orange. Alright, so I'm going to do that to all 4 and I'll get back to you. Rightio, so now I've stripped all the heat shrink off the ESCs, and what we need to do to save some weight, and because we're going to be direct soldering and things like that, we're going to strip off every single one of these wires except for this white wire here, because that's going to be our signal wire, so we're going to need that. And the reason we're stripping off these two as well, usually people don't do this, but we're going to replace this with some thinner gauge wire just to save that extra little bit of weight, because this build is all about making it as light as possible. Alright, and we'll do this to all 4 of my ESCs and get back to you. Okie dokie. And now what we're going to do, so I've got my 4 ESCs all stripped and desoldered like that, except for the signal wire, because we're going to be using that one. I'm just going to put a little fresh bit of solder on each one of these sort of little ports just here, and that's going to make our lives a lot easier when it comes to soldering on our new wires. Alright, and I'll do 3 and 4, and we can move on. Alright, so I've just put a little motor on my frame here so you can understand this step a little bit better. Essentially what we need to do, we need to solder in our ESCs. Alright, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my ESC on my arm just here, just sort of loosely hold it on and see how much wire I need. And I can see I need about 1 centimeter's worth of wire so I can easily mount the ESC and fit the connections. So I'm going to cut off these leads just here, leaving myself about 1 centimeter to work with. Alrighty, so now I'm going to do that, cutting these wires just here, 1 centimeter on all my motors, and that'll enable me to easily solder them to my ESC. Alright, so I've cut all my bullet connectors off here, and you don't want these anyway because they're actually substantially pretty heavy, a little bit of weight to them. So I'm going to throw them to the side, and you can see I've trimmed down all the wires just here, and now I'm going to go through and just strip the ends, and that'll make it easier when we want to solder it to our ESCs. So I'm going to go through and strip all these, and I'll be back. Alrighty, so I've stripped all the ends of these wires just here, and now we're going to pre-tin them, and that's going to make it so it's really easy to join onto our ESCs. So all you need to do is just with a little bit of solder on here, we're just going to heat it up and put a little bit of solder on there, so pre-tinning it. Alright, so now what we need to do, we need to connect these up to our ESCs, and I'm just going to connect them sort of from top to top, middle to middle, bottom to bottom, and that's because I don't really need to worry about the direction of these motors because I'm just going to change them in the software anyway, so I just want it to be nice and clean and light. So I'm just going to solder these up. And 3, and then I'll do this to all the others and get back to you. Alright, so all the ESCs are soldered up just here, and you can see I've got these are the signal wires that I haven't finished off just yet, but they're all soldered to the motors. But the first thing I want to do is just put a little bit of electrical tape just on the arms here before I put the heat shrink on, and that's going to stop them shorting out. So we need to make sure we do that on each one of these arms just like that. Alright, so I'm going to do that. Alright, so now that's done, the next step we need to do is cut our signal wires to the right length so they can match up to motors 1, 2, 3 and 4. You've got little ports on the board, and you can see that marked by the M1 and M2, 3 and 4. And just give yourself enough room so when you can solder it directly to those little tabs. So I'm going to do that right now, cut it about here for this one. Alright, and let's see, how long does motor 1 need? Motor 1 needs... about that much. Alrighty, and I'm going to strip the ends of those now that I've trimmed them down. So just strip in the end and we'll pre-tin it like we did with our ESC wires. Alright, and now we'll join it up. So we also want to make sure though we don't go over any of these two sort of holes, because we're still going to need to put some standoffs in here. So make sure you're leaving yourself enough room to do that. They're coming in from the right direction. Alrighty. Now it's time to hook up the power cables to these ESCs. Alright, now the next step we're going to do, I'm going to replace the 20 gauge wire that came with the ESC for some 24 gauge wire, and that's just going to make it a little bit lighter. So we need to cut ourselves 8 lengths of wire. I'm going to use black, just all one colour to keep this nice sort of colour scheme, and I'm going to cut them oversize. Alrighty, so there's my 8 lengths of wire. I've already stripped the first 4, I'm going to strip down these last ones as well, so that'll be 5 and 8. Alright, and we're going to pre-tin these and then hook them up to our ESCs. Alright, so we've got our 8 wires and we're going to solder those onto our ESCs so we can actually power the bad boy up. Alright, so I'm going to go around and do all of these, and I'll cut to the next shot. Alright, so I've got my ESC wires soldered in. Now what you need to do is run them to the correct pads on the PDB. Now if you're using these little B ESCs, gee, that's a bit of a mouthful, just remember that this side just here with sort of these ruts across it, these one, this side and this side just here, that's going to be your positive. So I've only used black wire here, and usually that'll be a red wire for people to understand and make the difference. So make sure you connect this up to the correct terminal on each of these. So we're going to solder them in positive to positive and negative to negative on the Genix PDB, and it should look pretty good. So I'm going to measure all these, cut them, pre-tin them and solder them to the next point, because I'm pretty sure if you've kept up to this point by now you'll be able to figure that out, and we'll be back with it all looking nice and clean. Alright, and here it is, looking all swanky and finished and soldered up. Now you'll also notice I've put in the last 2 sort of screws in just here, and that's going to be so our board fits nice and flat. Also noting that I've used a little plastic nut just in here to stop the PDB touching the carbon, so that's really important as well, so you've got that little bit of clearance. So there's a few things left to do now. What we're going to do, we're going to find a way of mounting our XT30 connector just here so we can still be zip tied down, and run some wires up so we can power our VTX. So that's our next step, so we'll get to it. Alright, so we'll solder in our little power lead here for our Onway 200 milliwatt transmitter, and this is an absolutely fantastic little thing. It's light, it's small. We're going to cut off this part just here, so soon we'll directly solder the antenna on, but this is definitely the one we're going to be using. So it's got 32 channels, it's fantastic, really can recommend it. Plus, it puts out a nice 5 volt out, nice clean 5 volts out, so it can power our FPV camera, so really, really good. Alright, so what I've done, I've cut this right cable to length. I'm going to pre-tin it, and then I'm just going to solder it directly to the positive and negative terminals on one part of the PDB. Rightio, so there's the power for our FPV system, I can't talk properly, and our VTX. Now we've just got to look at a way of mounting our XT30 just here on the back. Now to mount our XT30, I've actually been thinking about this a little bit, and I would love to directly solder this almost straight to the board, but I don't want to put any pressure because it won't fit flat on the base plate just here. I don't want to put any pressure on the PDB when we're unplugging or anything like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a bit of foam under here so it rests the same height, and then I'm going to extend ever so slightly these two little prongs just here, so we should be able to connect and hit the positive and negative on the PDB. First things first, I think I need to find some way to prop it up. So I'm going to find a bit of foam or something like that, and I'll get back to you. Alright, so I had a great bit of luck here. I found this old bit of foam that I chopped out, just a small square just here, and that's what I'm going to rest my XT30 connector on. And then all I need is a little bit of wire, and I'm going to use the one off the ESC just to make this a little bit longer. So I'm going to solder that in by about, let's say 5 mils there, so half a centimeter, and that should be the perfect height for our XT30 connector to be able to be zip tied down without placing pressure on the PDB. So let's get started on that part. Alright, so first things first, I'm going to solder in some wire into my XT30 connector. So I'm just going to use the ESC wire that I've got just here. I'm going to pre-tin some of that and solder up my XT30 connector first, and then we'll find out how long we need to cut it to solder it into here. Little tip, I'm going to use my pliers so I can solder my XT30 pretty easily, because here's one, spin it over, do the other side, and two. Now I'll solder in my little wires. One, and two. I don't think anything's ever gone so easy as that. Alright, let's keep moving on. Alright, so this is going to go just straight on the top like that, and I'm going to measure, so I need about that much distance. This is the smallest length of wire I've ever used, so I'm going to just strip all that silicone off just there. Look at that. I'll pre-tin these, and then I'll be able to just directly solder these straight on to the PDB. Alright, so I'll pre-tin these, and then I'll be able to directly solder them straight on to the PDB. Alright, and we want to make sure we get this around the right way. So the flat side is definitely the positive one, and that's what we're going to line up with this positive terminal just here, that pad. Now right before I solder this in, I'm going to use this little bit of heat shrink, and that's just to go over the edge of the XT60 just like that, so it can rubberize it, and it's going to make it a lot easier for the zip tie to grip and also for my hands to grip when I'm going to pull the battery on and off. Now I don't have a heat gun, so I'm going to go use my old lady's hairdryer, and I'll get back and show you how it looks, and we'll put it on the board. Alright, so that's all looking good, and now we're going to make sure we're around the right way, so flat side on the positive, and we can solder our XT30 onto our board. Alright, so it's looking pretty good. What I'm going to do, I'm going to slide the nays on just here. We've got an XT30 on and an FPV power. We've wired up all our ESCs, so it's pretty good to go. So we're just going to work on our VTX connections right now and the receiver. Alright, so I've put my nays on here, and I've put a couple of standoffs on top of that. Everything's looking pretty good, but the moment of truth, we're going to plug it in and see how we go. Please, please no smoke. Woo! Look at that. Fantastic, so pretty pumped about that. Alright, let's keep going. Alright, so moving along, the next thing we're going to talk about is our receiver. Now I'm going to be using the Lemon RX, the satellite receiver, because it's got diversity, and also because when you take it apart, it is absolutely tiny and just what we need for our build. So I can get rid of those parts. I'm going to de-shell it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to unplug this part just here, and I'm going to solder this in. Now this receiver only takes 3 volts. So we're going to get our voltage from this little 3 volt output just here. I'll unscrew this so you can see it just there, and then we're going to run our signal cable to here and our ground to this one just here. So the signal cable will be on the one, but really make sure that you're running your voltage from the 3 volt output, otherwise you're going to fry your nice little receiver. Alright, so let's solder this in and keep going. There we go, that's looking good, and that's going to let us put our receiver just on top here right to the side, because it needs to be really clean, because we still also need to fit our VTX in here, which is what we'll work on in a minute. Alright, so this is all soldered in just here, and that's going to let our little receiver, our satellite receiver, which I think is fantastic, sit in just here on the side. Alright, now I guess it's time to put in our Omway VTX, so I'm going to put that in somewhere sort of fitting in here. But before we do any of that, we've got to mess around a little bit and pull this sort of jack off the back, this SMA connector. So we're going to work at getting that off and directly soldering on an antenna. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so what we need to essentially do is desolder all of this and pull this connector off. Now, it's very difficult to desolder everything at once. You can get some stuff that puts on there that keeps the solder hot. I don't have that stuff, so I'm actually going to clip around the outside here and try to desolder each individual part one at a time after I've cut it. So let's see how we go. First things first, I'm going to have to cut this bad boy here, so let's see how we go. There's one side done. Alrighty, so after a lot of trial and practicing and probably burning the thing, we finally got our little SMA connector off the back of our Omway VTX, and now we're going to cut an antenna in half and solder it directly onto here. Alright, now the antenna I'm going to be using is an old Fat Shark antenna, and I've taken the top off here and I plan to take this piece of plastic off as well just to keep the weight down. But we need to rough out basically how long we think it's going to be once our top plate's on here, because the antenna is going to come up through here. Normally I wouldn't use the Fat Shark antennas, but because it's permanently on there I want to make sure I have a good one. So let me see, I was just having a bit of a play around before. I reckon if we cut it about here, that should be the right length for my atom anyway, the size that I want to have. So I'm going to give that a snip. Gee, this feels weird and wrong cutting this, can I just say that? Alright, so I've cut my antenna and now I'm going to just ream the outside very lightly because I want to pull this sort of red plastic off just here to get at the shielding underneath. I'm just going to lightly cut through here and we should be able to take this plastic off. Alrighty, so we're going to cut this off just here. So there's the first part of the step done. Alright, and now we've taken that off, what we want to do, we want to unbraid this sort of shielding on the outside because we're going to be soldering with that in a minute, and we need to get at the plastic and the middle wire that's in here. Alright, what I ended up doing was just cutting down the sides of each side one and splitting it just here because it's going to get some solder on it anyway, and it was just too difficult for me to unbraid. It was absolutely tiny, so that's what I'm going to do. Right now I'm going to pull the plastic off and expose a little sort of, I guess, the antenna, the actual receptive part underneath. Alright, so here it is all exposed just here, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little bit of solder on each one of these and then I'm going to solder it just straight on top like that. So these three prongs, the two earth wires, and I guess the antenna part just here will go on correspondingly just on these parts. So the two outside ones will be the earth sort of shielding, and the middle part is going to be this little copper wire in here. So that's what we're going to solder to, and hopefully we'll have a hard soldered antenna that works. Alrighty, and now I'm going to try and solder my antenna onto my VTX, hopefully. I'm going to start with the middle pin because I think that's the most important. Alright, so here's the end result. Definitely a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, but hopefully it pays off in the end. If you really don't want to do this step, it's always fine just to leave these little SMA connectors on here. I took them off because I was really trying to push myself on this build and make the best build I could, but feel free to leave these on here. So this is just going to sit in the top just here, and hopefully it fits nicely when it pops up through this back plate. And now that this is done and all soldered away, I'm going to cover this in hot glue because this will definitely be a weak point of the build. Maybe even epoxy. So if you've got epoxy or hot glue, definitely cover this up to give it some extra strength. Alright, so we've got our VTX ready, but we need to get something ready on the other end, and that's the camera. Now I'm going to use this camera from Banggood. I've got a link to it in my description, and pretty much I think it's a good range. I like the lens size, so this is why I picked this one. I've used it before and I really find it enjoyable. But something I'm excited about, I got these from Genix or Genix, I don't actually know how to pronounce it, but something that I do like is that it comes with these little camera mounts specially made for these size cameras. So they're going to sit in nicely, and they come in a variety of angles as well. I've got 15, 20 and 25 degrees. Now of course I'm going to pick 25 degrees because this thing is going to be a rocket, and that's going to fit in nicely here. And something I have done, I've just drilled out a little bit in there so I can put a screw through here, a little plastic screw, and that's going to fit down nicely into the bottom of the Atom frame just here. It's almost like it's very, very well designed, and you can see that will hold the camera mount very tightly in place. I can pull that screw through even more actually, tighten it down, and then I'll be able to stick my camera in there just like that. So that's what I'm going to do. Alright, now that that's all securely bolted down just there, I really love those camera mounts, definitely worth it I think. I'm going to put this in here, my little camera, fits perfectly, nice angle, and I want to see how much space I need to give it before it hits the VTX. So here's a little on-way plug just here, so I'm going to slide that in, and I'm going to measure it up so I can cut some wires. My VTX is going to go about there, so give myself a little bit of extra room. So I'm going to cut these cables about here. There we go. And then I'm going to solder those up just straight across to here. And the reason we can do that is because our on-way VTX will actually provide a 5-volt output, and that's what we're going to use to power our camera. Alright, so that's all cut, pre-tinned and ready to be soldered together. I'm just going to pop some heat shrink on here just so we don't short circuit or anything like that when we power it on. So I'm going to solder these up and we'll keep going. Alright, so that's all heat shrunk, ready to go. That'll connect straight over here to our on-way VTX, so that's going to look good. We're going to put this in here, plug our receiver in. We're getting pretty excited here, almost ready to go. We'll plug our receiver in and we'll have a bit of a play and see how we can fit it in the top. Alright, so here's what ended up happening. Just to make sure that it fitted in just here, I actually took out this front little standoff part that's meant to be poking up here, and that lets the plug of the VTX come over here, and also lines the VTX up nicely with the antenna hole that'll happen in the back. We've got our normal standoffs and the receivers sitting just on this side, so everything looks like it's fitting in there pretty well. I used electrical tape to hold it down, but I think it's going to be a pretty snug build anyway, so it's not going to be going too far, so I'm more than happy to be using that. If it gets a bit sketchy or something, I may consider using a zip tie, but I think it's looking pretty good. So right now I'm going to hot glue down here my camera, because that needs to be secured in place. I'll put the battery strap in, and then we'll secure the top plate and heat shrink on the ESC, and we should be ready to rock and roll. Alright, here it is right here, looking pretty good. I had some spare blue sort of anodized aluminium bolts just here, but you can definitely use the ones that come with it, so they've got some black ones that come with it, but I've got these so I use blue. And remember, I didn't put this standoff in because I needed the space for my VTX. So now I'm going to slide some clear heat shrink on over the motors and on the arms, and this will wrap the ESCs and keep them nice and tight. I thought about using black heat shrink, but I think that clear is going to look a lot better, because there's so much going on in here, and it looks crazy with all these sorts of parts, so I think that's sort of the theme I'm going for. So I put the heat shrink over the ESCs, completely push it over the motor so it's also wrapped onto the arm. I've zip tied down the XT30 connector. Everything's looking pretty hunky-dory. Now I'm just going to put some props on, screw them down, and we should be good to go. Alright, so the clockwise props, they're the ones with little R on them, or I guess reverse. They go on motors 1 and 4, and the counterclockwise ones, they go on motors 2 and 3. Alright, and they should come with some little screws, so we're just going to screw them in and we'll be ready. Alrighty, and the last thing I'm going to put on is some Atom armor. Now this stuff only weighs 1 or 2 grams, and it's really easy. It just slides on the outside of your arms just here, just like that. And that's going to offer the motors a little bit more protection in a crash, because I'd prefer to break this plastic than to break this frame. And I got these from Genix as well, so the same place I got the PDB and also the camera mount. Look at that, look how easy it is. Alright, look at this bad boy. Woo! So let's see how much this thing weighs. So hopefully we're going to be under 100 grams. Well, that was the plan anyway. Ahoo! Look at that. 99 grams. But well, that sounds like a song. 99 grams, but something or other. Anyway, all right. Let's go buzz this thing around.
On one? Yeah. 3, 2...
Rightio, so there it is. There's my build guide for the Rotor X Atom. Now, definitely love this little frame. The most fun I've ever had, and I can't wait to see all the ones that you guys build. Can definitely recommend it. You're going to have such a blast, so much fun. I'm going to leave you with some flight footage of this thing zipping it around, because it is the king of fun and I absolutely love it. Subscribe for more FPV related content, and as always, happy flying! Now this is just some DVR of the 99 gram monster. No HD camera or anything like that because we're trying to keep the weight down. I really hope this helps some of you guys out there. I'd love to see some of your builds. And hit that like button if you actually watch this thing from start to finish, because this is a long video, like 35 minutes or something. Anyways, happy flying!